Today we're going to look at the Spark Fun Weather Bit, which plugs into your Microbit, and it can give you an idea of temperature, pressure, humidity. There are other options as well: wind speed, soil moisture, soil temperature, rain gauge. But yeah, we'll go into a bit more details about them. Now, this is where I bought mine in South Africa at the Pie Shop, but there's tons of other online places to buy it. First, let's just look through all the sensors. And so there's this learnsparkfun.com, and it takes you through the kit, the Microclimate Kit Experiment Guide. And so let's just look at it here. This is what it looks like, and let's talk about each sensor. And this edge connector at the top here is where you plug in your Microbit. Next along here, you've got your barometric pressure sensor. So this sensor here is the built-in sensor, which you don't have to have any of these fancy plugins at the bottom. So we can all read these values off. There's also the weather meter sockets at the bottom, wind speed and rain gauge. But you can see you've got to have a plug-in like this to measure these. Also soil moisture and temperature at the bottom. Again, it's another attachment that you need that I don't have, so I won't be able to show you today, so we'll just do the basics of the temperature, pressure and humidity. That takes you there. And then there's a serial port on the left that you could plug in an LCD screen, which again I don't have, but you're welcome to go further, and an I2C port on the right hand side that I don't know too many details about. For more sensors. So we're just going to do the basics today of how to get values out of this sensor over here. And so what we are going to do is going to go to microbit.org, go to org.let's code, scroll down to the make code editor, click let's code, and click on new project. And we have to load in this extension, so you click down in advanced, go to the bottom, click on extensions, and in this search bar here, type in Spark Fun Weather /bit and search for it. There it shows up, click on it, and it downloads the extension. Again, you can see it loads down here, Weather Bit. And let's talk through the code that we're going to be running. So you can see on start, we're going to create a variable called item, and we're going to make it equal to 0. And this item this variable is going to help us read out the temperature, the humidity value, and the pressure value. And I've likened it before, an item to a box that you put values inside, or items inside of. From what I understand, you define it at the start here just to set aside some memory for it. And at the start, we're just going to set it to 0. And once we've gone through the code, I'll talk about how you actually create this code. Where do you find this variable item? The next thing you add to this on start block is start weather monitoring. So as soon as your Microbit starts, you need to start up this weather monitoring. And this is part of this weather bit menu, so we'll find it there. And the next thing here, we're going to define what happens once we've started up our Microbit and we push button A. And you can see here we've got this on button A block. And when it's pressed, what must happen is you must change item, and so item is a variable we described over here, by 1. So obviously if we start, the item value starts out as 0. When I push button A, it's going to become 1. If I push button A again, it's going to become 2. Push button A again, it's going to become 3. So every time I push button A, my variable called item is going to increase by a value of 1. And you'll see now why this is important. And it comes into play when we bring in this forever block or event down here. And there's several if statements within this forever block, and for each one I define what my variable is equal to. And so let me explain that. You can see here when the item or my variable is equal to 0, then I'm going to display the temperature on the screen. When the item is equal to 1, I'm going to display the humidity on the screen, and when the item is equal to 2, I'm going to display the pressure on the screen. So now you can see why the importance of this push A button, because that's what's going to change your variable from being 0, 1, and 2, and therefore display your values on the screen. And so that's why we need this if statement. because if the variable item is equal to 0, then display the temperature. Else, if the item is equal to 1, then display humidity. Else, if the item is equal to 2, then display the pressure values. And the last statement to end off this block is else set item to 0, so we can start all over again, because obviously you want to start back at 0, because if you keep pushing button A, then it's going to go up to 3, 4, 5, and nothing's going to happen when item is equal to 3, 4, 5, because you haven't defined anything. So you want it to stop once item is equal to 2. If you push A again and suddenly item becomes equal to 3, then the program knows automatically it's not allowed to be equal to 3, it needs to jump back to 0, so you're setting item to 0. So there's no way that item can be equal to anything bigger than 2. And the reason why you have these 2 blocks here is you first of all going to, when the item is equal to 0, you're going to show string. String is just a code way of saying text, and you're going to say the words temp C, and then next you're actually going to show the number. And the number you're going to show is temperature, and you can see it's this pink block, which is the same as the start weather monitoring, so it must come from the Weatherbit menu. But you have to take this temperature value and divide by 100, and I'll explain now why. Next, for humidity, you're going to show the string or text humidity, and percent is its unit, and up here temperature C is the unit, so it's in centigrade. And then you're going to show the number humidity from the Weatherbit menu divided by 1024. And lastly, when item is equal to 2, you're going to show the string pressure, and HPA, Pascal, is the units for pressure. You can see here it stands for hectopascal. Pascal is the usual measurement for pressure. And we divide by 25,600. And the reason why we divide by these amounts, this website explains, they just say that it's due to the fact that make code, so the drag and drop website we're using, cannot handle floating point numbers and numbers with lots of decimal points yet. And so that's why values you're getting out from the menu don't have floating points, and then you're bringing in floating points or decimal places by dividing it, and that's the accurate value. Okay, so now that we've got the menu installed ourselves, let's create this code. And so you can see here's the on start and the forever button that are automatically there, and the first thing we do is create a variable, and you'll see nothing comes up in this variable menu, so you have to click on make variable and type in the word here item. You can see as soon as you create it, several things come up in the menu, several blocks. I click on the set item to 0, click and drag, and remember that's what we were going to do at the beginning. We're going to define this variable called item, and we're going to set it to 0. The next thing we have to do is click on this Weatherbit menu and go start weather monitoring and put it underneath there. And that's kind of just to initialize the system. Let's just click back here and see all the other code blocks that you can click and drag on. You can see start rain monitoring, start wind monitoring. Unfortunately, we're not going to use that because we don't have the equipment, but we'll be using these blocks up top here. Okay, so next we had to go to input and say on button A pressed and drag it here. So what happens when we push button A? We're going to add 1 to this item variable. And how you do that, you go here to this variable menu and you go down here to change item by 1, click and drag here. So remember the value is going to increase by 1 every time we push A. And now we're going to actually do the main part of the code. Remember we needed to add an if statement. So we're going to use the second if statement here that includes the else, and click and drag onto the screen here. If you click the plus button here, you can see it creates an else if. And remember we needed 2 else ifs, because first one we're going to do temperature, then humidity, then pressure, and remember we're going to end off with an else statement underneath. Okay, in this block here that says true, we're going to add an equals statement. And so we're going to click on the logic menu, scroll down here to this equals block and drag it in here. And the reason why we're doing this is we want to say if the variable called item, and so let's click here on variables, click on item and drag it here. If it's equal to 0, then what must we do? We must, first we said show string, and we're going to click here and drag show string, and we were going to say temp C and then a semicolon. And the next thing we're going to do is show a number. So click here, show number, and drag underneath. And the number we're going to show is we're going to go and take this temperature value. But remember, we first had to divide it by 100. So rather click on maths and take this purple topped block down that's got divide and put it over here. And then in this first white block that's got a 0, you click on Weatherbit, take temperature C, there we are, and change the 0 to 100. So we're going to show the string or the text temp C and then show the number temperature divided by 100. In the next block here, link to the humidity, and it's quite easy that you just click on this equals block up here for item equal to 0, right click and go duplicate, and then you click and drag it, put it down in this first else if line and change the 0 to 1. So remember we said here if item was equal to 1, then we're going to display the humidity. And again, easy to do is just go up here, click on show string temp C and right click duplicate and drag here, and just change the writing from temp C to humidity. Percentage is how we read humidity, it's a percentage value. And then click on show number here under item is equal to 0, right click duplicate, drag it down here. Sorry, put it, sometimes you just got to fiddle around. You're going to change this temperature value. You can just click on this red temperature circle and delete it. Go back to Weatherbit, click on humidity, click and drag, and the value we divided by is 1024. Okay, and then this last else if line, again, you can copy either of these equals blocks, drag it down and change it to 2, and again you can duplicate either of these string blocks, and I'm going to change it to pressure hectopascals, big P, small a, and then duplicate any of these show number blocks. I'm going to delete humidity, I'm going to take pressure here, and then we're going to divide by 25,600. Then remember, right at the end we have to set item back to 0 so that it doesn't keep going up in value. So under else, the final else, set item to 0. And that is your code right there. So you need to save it. We're going to save it as Weatherbit. And click save. And I like to save it to a folder on my desktop so I can find it easily. You can see it saves it as a .hex file. Click save. And while that's downloading, you can see it actually shows on this demo here what will be displayed on a screen. So it's plug in my Microbit and it will pop up on the screen. And then I open up my desktop as well to my Microbit folder and then drag across the hex file we just created. Okay, so let's have a look how our program works. If we can read the sensor values, you can see I've got my Microbit plugged into my USB that goes into my computer. If you've got an external battery pack, you would plug it in over here, but you can run it off your computer if you don't have one of these. Okay, so I'm going to push this reset button at the back here to get it to start from the beginning. And you can see there it says temp C and it gives us a value. And you can see 28 point and then several decimal places, which I must admit the several decimal places make it difficult to read. If I push the A button, even while the values are being displayed, then what happens is it stores in the memory that I've added one to the variable, and next see it displays humidity. And it just takes a while to come across the screen. It's a percentage value, so 4 point, and again several decimal places. And again, I can push the A button so that as soon as all these numbers have gone across the screen, it's going to give me the pressure value. You can see a lot of numbers. And then here's pressure. In hectopascals. And the value is 877 point, and again more decimal places. So let's do a bit of refinement on our program. Let's take away those decimal places because I find it difficult to read and we don't need to know the number so accurately. And let's also add in a function when we push the B button. So we don't just have to go temperature, humidity, pressure. What happens if you want to go from pressure back to humidity? Okay, 2 adjustments I would make to the program are just rounding off your values. The values you get out here often have several decimal places, and so how you would do that is go into your maths menu on round here, and you want to drag it outside of this purple circle, and it kind of throws the other purple circle away with the temperature value in. You can just drag it back into the smaller circle. So what this means is I'm going to round off this temperature divided by 100 value. So instead of getting 25.996, I'm going to just get 26. So it rounds up or down. And so let's do it again with this humidity value. Over here, dragging it outside the bigger circle, you can see my humidity block has disappeared into the back there. So I can click it and bring it back. And last time round off. And last time round off the pressure value. And then drag the pressure in here. Another thing you could do if you wanted was to change on what happens when you push button B. And that would be quite fun as well. So you just duplicate your button A button, change the down arrow to make it change to B, and I would say change item by -1. Instead of having to scroll from temperature to humidity to get to pressure, and going through that loop, you can also go backwards by pushing the -B button. So let's save it. I'm going to save it as weatherbit 1. I don't always like to write over programs just from experience with other software. Sometimes it doesn't actually happen, and then you think you're going mad, but it's actually just it didn't overwrite the program and you're stuck with your old program. But I've never had that problem with Microbit, but I'm not willing to risk it. So I'm going to save it and then drag it into my Microbit. Okay, so let's see how rounding off helped with our values here. So I'm going to push the reset button at the back, and you can see it's going to display temp on the screen, and C, and it's going to give us a value of 28. So you can see so much easier to view, and it starts again. Then you're going to push the A button. You can even push the A button while it's still displaying the temperature values on the screen, and it saves it in the memory that you've added a number 1, and you can see it's changed there automatically to humidity. I'd say push A again to get to temperature, but let's try our B button. If I push B, it should -1 from the variable item and take us back to temperature. And there it's taken us back to temperature. Let's push A twice and see if it takes us straight away to pressure after it gives us the temperature value. There it's displaying pressure on the screen. So our code seems to work.